December 7th, 1941. 7:55 a.m. Pearl Harbor Territory of Hawaii. The morning sky is bright and clear above the calm blue water of the harbor. From the cockpit of a Mitsubishi A-6M20, fighter Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya watches the American fleet below grow larger through the windscreen. The engine of his aircraft roars steadily, the Nakajima Sakai radial vibrating through the frame as the formation dives. Below him, the battleships of the United States Pacific Fleet lie quietly at anchor. USS Arizona, USS Oklahoma, USS West Virginia. Gray steel silhouettes resting motionless beside Ford Island. On the radio, Japanese voices speak calmly through bursts of static. Tora, Tora, Tora. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida's signal spreads across the formation. Total surprise has been achieved. Bombers descend. Torpedo planes skim the harbor's surface. Fighters strafe airfields where American aircraft sit wingtip to wingtip. Within minutes, the quiet harbor erupts into flame. Black smoke begins rising from the battleship row. Anti-aircraft guns slowly awaken as stunned American sailors scramble for ammunition. Explosions roll across the water like thunder. In the sky above it all, the pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy feel something close to certainty. Months of planning have led to this moment. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, had warned Tokyo that the attack could only buy time. But among many officers of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the calculation seems simple. Destroy the American fleet quickly. Force the United States to negotiate. End the war before America's vast resources can mobilize. The men flying above Pearl Harbor believe they are witnessing the decisive first step toward that outcome. They have been trained for years to reach this moment. In Japan, naval aviation training is slow, brutal, and selective. Only the most capable pilots survive the process. Flight schools produce a small elite cadre of aviators who train together for years before joining operational units. Each pilot represents an enormous investment of time and skill. They are masters of precision, masters of formation flying, masters of long-range navigation over open ocean. Lieutenant Commander Itaya glances down again as a massive explosion erupts from USS Arizona. The battleship's forward magazine detonates in a blinding flash. A column of fire climbs hundreds of feet into the air. From the cockpit, it looks like the destruction of an entire fleet. It reinforces everything these pilots have been taught. The Imperial Japanese Navy believes war at sea will be decided by skill, experience, and decisive battle. Ships will clash. Aircraft will strike. The most capable crews will prevail. Across the Pacific Ocean, however, another force is already beginning to move. Quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. Factories, shipyards, civilian workers. But on this morning in 1941, almost no one in Tokyo truly fears them. The doctrine of the Imperial Japanese Navy has been shaped by decades of strategic thought. Officers study the theories of Alfred Thayer Mahan and the history of great naval battles. They imagine a final decisive engagement somewhere in the Western Pacific. American ships will steam across the ocean to confront Japan's fleet. Japanese forces will weaken them with submarines and air attacks. Then the combined fleet will destroy what remains in a single, massive battle. Victory through precision. Victory through experience. Victory through superior training. Inside the Naval General Staff Building in Tokyo, maps of the Pacific cover the walls of planning rooms. Officers move small wooden markers across the charts representing fleets and squadrons. They count ships, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, aircraft carriers. The numbers seem manageable. Japan possesses 10 aircraft carriers in 1941, more than any other navy in the world. Its pilots are widely considered the best-trained naval aviators on Earth. Its torpedoes, especially the Type 93 oxygen-powered Long Lance, outrange anything carried by American destroyers. Confidence grows from these numbers. The United States Japanese planners believe may be wealthy. It may possess a large industrial base. But ships are not built overnight. Warships require years of construction. Naval crews require years of training. Even if the Americans choose to fight, the assumption is simple. They will not recover quickly. And if they cannot recover quickly, they will eventually accept a negotiated peace. At the Mitsubishi shipyards in Nagasaki, steel plates echo under the pounding of hammers. Workers shape the hulls of new destroyers and cruisers under the watchful eyes of naval inspectors. These yards are tightly controlled. Every vessel is built according to strict naval specifications. Everything is deliberate. Everything is slow. Everything is expensive. Japanese shipbuilding reflects the philosophy of its navy. Quality over quantity. Precision over scale. Ships designed as instruments of decisive battle. Few officers in Tokyo spend much time studying what is happening inside American shipyards. And the few who do often misunderstand what they see. In places like Newport, News, Virginia, and Camden, New Jersey, American shipbuilders have long experience constructing large vessels. But in 1941, something else is beginning to happen. A quiet transformation. Civilian industries that once built automobiles, bridges, and freight trains are preparing to build ships. Thousands of workers who have never worn naval uniforms are learning how to weld steel hulls. Factories that once produced refrigerators and farm equipment are preparing to manufacture engines, turbines, and radar sets. The shift is gradual, almost invisible. And from the perspective of Japanese naval planners, it does not appear immediately threatening. They believe war at sea is fought by fleets, by admirals, by sailors, by trained naval crews. They do not yet understand that in the United States, civilians are about to enter the war in a way that will reshape the balance of power across the entire Pacific Ocean. Back above Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Commander Itaya pulls his Zero out of a dive and banks eastward toward the open sea. Behind him, smoke rises across the harbor. Battleships burn. Airfields are shattered. American aircraft lie wrecked on runways. The attack appears devastating. The pilots of the First Air Fleet begin the long journey back to their carriers. For many of them, it feels like the beginning of inevitable victory. Thousands of miles away, however, cranes are already rising over American shipyards. Steel is arriving by train. New workers are being hired by the tens of thousands. And within months, ships will begin sliding down American slipways faster than almost anyone in Tokyo believes possible. But on December 7, 1941, in the smoke-filled skies above Pearl Harbor, the officers of the Imperial Japanese Navy still believe the war will be decided by fleets and admirals. They do not yet understand that the most powerful force entering the conflict is neither a battleship nor an aircraft carrier. It is an industrial system, and it has only just begun to wake up. January 12, 1942, 3:10 p.m., Naval General Staff Headquarters, Tokyo. Snow falls quietly outside the windows of the gray government building overlooking Tokyo Bay. Inside a long conference room, senior officers of the Imperial Japanese Navy stand around a massive table covered with maps of the Pacific. The air smells faintly of tobacco and ink. Rear Admiral Sadatoshi Tomioka, a senior strategist assigned to the Naval General Staff, adjusts his glasses and studies a series of intelligence reports stacked before him. The papers have arrived from naval attachés in Washington, from Japanese consulates along the American coast, and from intercepted commercial shipping reports. Numbers are written in careful columns: shipyards, construction contracts, steel production, tonnage projections. Most officers glance at the reports only briefly before turning their attention back to operational matters. The early months of the war are unfolding exactly as Japanese planners had hoped. Hong Kong has fallen. The Philippines are collapsing under General Masaharu Homa's advancing forces. Singapore, Britain's supposed fortress in the east, is on the verge of surrender. Across the Western Pacific, Japanese naval forces are advancing almost without resistance. Yet Rear Admiral Tomioka continues reading. One figure keeps repeating in the intelligence summaries: shipyards, not naval dockyards, civilian shipyards. The reports describe enormous construction programs beginning along the American coastline. New facilities expanding in places like Richmond, California, Baltimore, Maryland, New Orleans, Portland. Entire complexes of slipways designed not for a few large warships, but for dozens of vessels being built simultaneously. Tomioka quietly clears his throat. These figures suggest the Americans are expanding commercial ship production, he says. Several officers nod without concern. Japan has seen American merchant ship construction before. The United States maintains a large merchant marine fleet, and civilian shipping is essential for its trade. What matters in naval war, however, are combat vessels, aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, Rear Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who has been closely involved in naval aviation planning, gestures toward a different set of charts showing Japanese advances through Southeast Asia. The Americans cannot replace their fleet quickly, Onishi says calmly. Their Pacific fleet was crippled at Pearl Harbor. Several officers murmur agreement. Even if American industry expands, they believe warships still require years to design, construct, and commission. Naval crews must be trained, weapons must be installed, complex systems must be tested. Everything takes time, and Japan intends to win the war before that time arrives. Meanwhile, far across the Pacific Ocean, a very different kind of planning meeting is taking place. January 15th, 1942. Richmond, California. Kaiser Shipyard. Number 2. The cold wind off San Francisco Bay rattles metal scaffolding surrounding a massive steel hull under construction. Workers in heavy coats climb ladders along the ship's frame, welding torches, sparking bright bursts of light against the gray afternoon sky. Henry J. Kaiser, a civilian industrialist with no background in naval shipbuilding, stands near the edge of the slipways studying a blueprint. He built dams during the New Deal, massive concrete structures erected in record time. Now the U.S. government has asked him to build ships, lots of ships. Cargo ships, simple vessels designed to carry ammunition, fuel vehicles, and supplies across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. They are called Liberty ships. Unlike traditional naval vessels, Liberty ships are not masterpieces of craftsmanship. They are intentionally simple, roughly 441 feet long, powered by basic triple expansion steam engines, constructed from welded steel sections rather than riveted plates. Each ship is designed to be assembled quickly using prefabricated components. Kaiser turns to a group of engineers beside him. "We are not building ships the old way," he says. "We are building them like automobiles. The concept is revolutionary for shipbuilding. Instead of constructing an entire vessel piece by piece on a single slipway, Liberty ships are divided into large prefabricated sections. Hull sections, deck houses, engine rooms. These components are assembled separately across the shipyard by teams of workers, then lifted into place by massive cranes. Assembly line production, but on water. Thousands of workers pour into the yards. Men, women, farmers, factory laborers, students. Many have never seen a ship under construction before. They are trained quickly. How to weld, how to fit steel plates, how to operate cranes. Within weeks, the shipyard begins to resemble a massive industrial machine. Sections of ships move across the yard like components on a factory conveyor belt. At first, the process is slow. Workers make mistakes. Welds fail inspection. Schedules slip. But with each vessel completed, the process becomes faster, more efficient, more predictable. Back in Tokyo, however, these developments appear only as distant statistics on intelligence reports. Rear Admiral Tomioka continues flipping through the pages. There is something unusual in the American construction data. The pace. One report estimates that several new shipyards along the American West Coast will eventually be capable of producing dozens of vessels simultaneously. The number seems unrealistic, even exaggerated. He raises the issue again. These figures suggest a production rate far beyond traditional shipbuilding. Vice Admiral Osami Nagano, Chief of the Naval General Staff, listens patiently before responding. "The Americans always exaggerate industrial capability," Nagano says calmly. "Our strategy does not depend on competing with their industry. Instead, Japan's strategy depends on something else entirely. Time, speed, decisive victory before American production can influence the war." The combined fleet continues expanding its defensive perimeter across the Pacific. Wake Island, Rabaul, the Dutch East Indies. Each conquest pushes Japanese forces farther from the home islands, but also farther into resource-rich territory. Oil from Indonesia, rubber from Malaya, tin and bauxite from Southeast Asia. These resources are expected to sustain Japan's war effort for years. But resources alone do not win wars at sea. Ships must carry them. Fuel must move across thousands of miles of ocean. Troops must be transported between distant islands. The Japanese merchant fleet becomes the quiet backbone of the empire's expanding territory, yet its size is limited. Roughly 6 million tons of merchant shipping exists when the war begins, a valuable but fragile lifeline. And far across the ocean, American shipyards are beginning to produce new ships designed specifically to replace losses. Ships that can be built faster than submarines can sink them. The reports sit quietly on the desks of Japanese naval planners. Numbers, ship counts, construction schedules, warnings written in dry, bureaucratic language. But in early 1942, victory still seems close. The Imperial Japanese Navy is undefeated. Its pilots dominate the skies. Its fleets control vast stretches of ocean. The warnings remain just that. Warnings. Few officers in Tokyo yet believe that somewhere inside American civilian shipyards, workers with welding torches and assembly lines are preparing to change the entire nature of the war at sea. October 18th, 1942. 6:40 a.m. Pacific Ocean, 600 miles northeast of Guadalcanal. Low gray clouds stretch across the horizon as the destroyer Ij-en Hatsukaze cuts through heavy swells. Salt spray bursts over the bow while the ship pushes south at 25 knots. On the bridge, Captain Commander Masao Kanemura grips the rail and studies the sea through binoculars. The wind is strong this morning. The sky hangs low. Visibility comes and goes as curtains of mist slide across the water. Below deck, the ship's turbines roar with steady vibration. Around Hatsukaze, several other destroyers follow in formation. The group escorts a convoy of Japanese transports carrying supplies to Guadalcanal. The campaign has become desperate. Since August, Japanese forces and American Marines have been fighting across the jungle-covered island around Henderson Field. Aircraft from the airstrip strike Japanese ships during daylight, forcing supply convoys to travel at night. Japanese officers call these missions the Tokyo Express. Fast destroyer runs through dark waters, racing south under the cover of darkness and retreating before sunrise. But this convoy is different. Today they must move slower cargo ships. Fuel, ammunition, food. Without supplies, Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal cannot hold the island. Commander Kanemura lowers his binoculars and turns toward his signals officer. Report convoy status. The officer checks a clipboard. 4 transports. Speed 12 knots. All engines normal. 12 knots. Too slow. Kanemura does not like it. Across the horizon, the transports appear as dark shapes rising from the waves. Large, aging merchant ships pressed into military service. Many were built before the war. Their engines strain under heavy cargo. They are essential to the empire, but they are fragile. At that moment, a lookout shouts from the mast. Aircraft. Kanemura snaps his binoculars upward. At first, he sees nothing but gray sky. Then a faint buzzing reaches the bridge. Engines. Several small dots appear between the clouds. The sound grows louder. Dive bombers. American Douglas, SBD. Dauntless aircraft descending through the overcast. Alarm bells ring across the destroyer. Battle stations. Crewmen sprint across the deck. Anti-aircraft gunners swing their weapons skyward. The destroyer's 25mm cannons begin firing. Tracer rounds climb into the sky. But the dive bombers continue downward with terrifying precision. One Dauntless breaks through the cloud layer directly above the convoy. Its wings tilt sharply as the pilot lines up his target. The bomb releases, a dark shape falling toward the sea. It strikes one of the transports amidships. The explosion sends a column of water and steel into the air. Flames spread instantly across the deck. Kanemura watches through his binoculars as crewmen scramble along the burning vessel. The ship slows, then begins to list. Another dive bomber strikes a second transport. Within minutes, the convoy is in chaos. American aircraft circle above the burning ships, attacking again and again. Destroyers fire desperately into the sky. But the convoy cannot escape. The slow cargo vessels cannot outrun the bombers. And there are simply too few escorts to protect them. Kanemura lowers his binoculars slowly. One transport rolls onto its side, then disappears beneath the waves. Thousands of tons of cargo sink with it. Fuel, ammunition, food, supplies that Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal will never receive. The attack lasts less than 15 minutes. When the aircraft finally disappear into the clouds, 2 transports are burning and a third is dead in the water. The convoy limps northward. Another supply mission failed. Yet this battle reveals something that Japanese commanders are only beginning to understand. They are losing ships faster than expected. Not warships, cargo ships, merchant vessels, transport ships, the vessels that keep an empire supplied. And every time one sinks, replacing it becomes more difficult. Weeks later, inside the Naval Ministry in Tokyo, reports from Guadalcanal begin piling up. Lost transports, damaged cargo vessels, ships sunk by aircraft, ships sunk by submarines. Each report describes the same problem. Logistics. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, who commands Japanese naval forces in the region, sends a blunt message. Supply losses are exceeding expectations. Replacement ships urgently required. But the merchant fleet is already strained. Japan entered the war with roughly 6 million tons of merchant shipping. It sounds like a large number. In reality, it is barely enough to supply an expanding empire that stretches from the Aleutian Islands to Indonesia. Oil must travel from Borneo to Japan, rubber from Malaya, food from occupied territories, troops between hundreds of islands. Every route requires ships, and ships are disappearing. American submarines are beginning to patrol Japanese shipping lanes. Their attacks are still limited in 1942, but they are increasing. More ships vanish every month. Meanwhile, something strange is happening across the Pacific. In Washington, shipping reports begin arriving from American naval intelligence. The numbers are surprising, not losses. Production. Cargo ships leaving American shipyards at a speed few officers fully expected. Liberty ships, large gray cargo vessels designed for mass production. At the Kaiser Richmond shipyards, workers cheer as a completed hull slides into the water. The launch takes only minutes. Another ship ready for service. Another cargo carrier joining the fleet. The speed of construction improves every month. Early ships required around 230 days to build. Now some yards complete them in under 100 days. The assembly line system works. Welded hull sections arrive at slipways already prepared. Cranes lower them into place. Workers weld the seams. Engines are installed. Within weeks, the vessel is ready to launch. American newspapers begin printing photographs of these ships sliding into the water, one after another. Most readers see only industrial success. But naval planners begin to understand the strategic implications. Each Liberty ship adds thousands of tons of cargo capacity. Each one means more supplies crossing oceans, more fuel for warships, more equipment for armies, more food for soldiers fighting across distant battlefields. Back in Tokyo, however, Japanese officers remain focused on naval battles, carrier clashes, surface engagements, submarine patrols. They still measure naval power by fleets, battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers. Few officers yet recognize the deeper shift underway. The war is becoming something different, a contest not only between fleets, but between industrial systems, between the ability to replace loss, between the ability to keep armies supplied across enormous distances. And slowly, quietly, American civilian shipyards are producing ships faster than Japan can sink them. February 3rd, 1943. 2:20 a.m. Bismarck Sea, north of New Guinea. The night sky is black and moonless. Thick clouds drift low above the water, hiding the stars and pressing darkness down over the convoy, moving slowly across the sea. On the bridge of the transport ship Kyokusei Maru, Captain Shigeo Miura stands beside the chart table, listening to the steady rumble of the ship's engines deep within the hull. 8 transports form the convoy. Around them, 8 destroyers cut through the waves as escorts. The ships carry nearly 7,000 Japanese soldiers bound for Lae, New Guinea. Reinforcements desperately needed to hold the front. The convoy left Rabaul hours earlier, attempting to cross the Bismarck Sea before American aircraft can locate them. Speed is limited. The transports can make only about 7 knots. Too slow for comfort. Captain Miura looks out over the dark ocean. To his right, he can just make out the silhouette of the destroyer Yukikaze, one of the most experienced ships in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Her bridge lights glow faintly as she escorts the convoy through the darkness. On the radio, signals crackle with routine reports. Convoy speed steady, escort formation holding. Weather conditions stable. So far, everything appears normal. Yet deep inside the Naval General Staff in Tokyo, officers know the situation in New Guinea is becoming dangerous. Japanese forces are scattered across isolated bases. Every garrison depends on transport ships for food, ammunition, and reinforcements. But each voyage risks disaster. American aircraft based in Australia now patrol the sea lanes. American submarines hunt shipping routes between the Philippines, Indonesia, and Japan. Every lost transport weakens Japan's ability to sustain its growing empire. Yet Japanese commanders still believe bold action and careful escort tactics can overcome these threats. The convoy moving through the Bismarck Sea represents that belief. Move quickly. Use destroyers for protection. Deliver reinforcements before the enemy reacts. For several hours, the convoy advances undetected. But just after dawn, the clouds begin to break. February 3rd, 1943, 7:05 a.m. A lookout on the destroyer Shirayuki raises binoculars toward the eastern horizon. Something moves in the sky. A small aircraft, flying low. The engine sound reaches the convoy seconds later. The aircraft circles once, then disappears into the clouds. It is an Australian Royal Air Force Lockheed Hudson reconnaissance plane. Within minutes, the radio operator aboard the aircraft sends a short message south. Convoy located. 8 transports. 8 destroyers. Position confirmed. Far to the south at Port Moresby. American and Australian air crews scramble toward their aircraft. The engines of Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers thunder to life. Nearby, squadrons of Bristol Beaufighter strike aircraft prepare for takeoff. Pilots review maps and attack plans. The convoy must be stopped before it reaches Lae. By mid-morning, the first bombers appear above the Bismarck Sea. Captain Miura sees them approaching through scattered clouds, large shapes high above the convoy. 4 engine bombers glinting in the sunlight. Air raid sirens scream across the convoy. Destroyers open fire. Anti-aircraft guns thunder across the water. The B-17s fly too high for accurate fire. Bombs fall through the sky. Massive columns of water explode beside the transports. The first wave misses, but the convoy's position is now known. Throughout the day, more aircraft arrive. Dive bombers, medium bombers, fighter escorts. The sky fills with the roar of engines. Then something unexpected happens. Low on the horizon, dark shapes appear racing across the water. Beaufighter strike aircraft flying at wave-top level. Their engines scream as they approach the convoy. Japanese gunners open fire, but the aircraft are already too close. The Beaufighters unleash streams of cannon fire directly into the bridges and gun crews of the escorting destroyers. Shells tear through steel. Explosions rip across decks. Gunners collapse. Control stations are shattered. Moments later, North American Bs-25 Mitchell bombers appear behind them. But these bombers are flying strangely low. Instead of dropping bombs from altitude, they approach just above the waves. Their pilots have developed a new tactic, skip bombing. Bombs released low over the water skip across the surface like stones, then slam into the sides of ships. The first bomb strikes Kyokusai Maru. Captain Miura feels the impact like a hammer striking the hull. The explosion rips open the ship's cargo hold. Flames erupt instantly. Soldiers rush toward lifeboats as the vessel begins to list. Around the convoy, other transports suffer the same fate. Bombs skip across the water. Explosions erupt along the sides of ships. Within minutes, several transports are burning fiercely. Destroyers struggle to rescue survivors while still fighting off aircraft. But the attacks continue throughout the day. Wave after wave of bombers strike the convoy. The sea fills with burning wreckage. Oil slicks spread across the water. By evening, nearly the entire convoy is destroyed. 7 of the 8 transports sink. More than 3,000 Japanese soldiers perish before ever reaching the battlefield. The surviving destroyers retreat north toward Rabaul, their decks crowded with exhausted survivors pulled from the sea. The disaster shocks Japanese naval planners. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea reveals a brutal reality. Slow transport ships cannot survive under modern air attack. Every convoy risks annihilation. But the loss carries another consequence. 7 transports. 7 valuable cargo vessels gone in a single day. Replacing them will not be easy. Japanese shipyards are already operating near full capacity. Steel supplies are limited. Skilled shipbuilders are scarce. Meanwhile, across the Pacific Ocean, something very different is happening. At shipyards in Richmond, California, Baltimore, and New Orleans, American workers gather beside slipways to watch another Liberty ship launch. The steel hull slides into the water. Workers cheer. A band plays patriotic music. Photographers capture the moment. But almost immediately, the slipway is cleared. Another hull section waits nearby. Another ship already under construction. Production lines move forward without pause. The speed of American shipbuilding begins to accelerate. Liberty ships are no longer unusual. They are becoming routine. Ships launched in weeks. Crews trained quickly. Cargo holds filled with fuel trucks, artillery, and aircraft parts. The industrial rhythm grows faster, and slowly the balance of the war begins to shift. Japan is losing ships one convoy at a time. America is building them by the dozens. But in early 1943, many Japanese commanders still believe the situation can be controlled. More escorts, better tactics, stronger defenses. They do not yet realize that the enemy they face is not simply an opposing navy. It is an industrial system that grows stronger every single day. September 27, 1943. 9:10 p.m. Inland Sea, Japan. The night air over the quiet harbor smells of salt and oil. Lights shimmer across the dark water, where dozens of merchant ships sit anchored, their silhouettes rising like silent mountains against the dim glow of shipyard cranes. On the bridge of the tanker Nisho Maru, Captain Hiroshi Tanaka studies a navigation chart under the yellow light of a small lamp. The tanker's cargo tanks are full of oil, precious oil, fuel refined from crude shipped from the Dutch East Indies and now headed for the industrial ports of the Japanese home islands. Around the tanker, the convoy prepares to depart. 5 cargo ships, 2 oil tankers, 3 escorting destroyers. Their destination lies north across waters increasingly hunted by American submarines. Captain Tanaka glances through the bridge window toward the escorts. The destroyer, JN Sashimo, idles nearby, her funnels breathing slow columns of smoke into the night sky. For months, the convoy routes have grown more dangerous. American submarines now appear everywhere, in the South China Sea, along the coast of Formosa, near the entrances to the inland sea itself. Shipping losses grow heavier each month, yet convoys must continue. Without oil, the Japanese Navy cannot sail. Without cargo ships, the empire cannot function. A signal lamp flashes from the escort destroyer. Convoy departure in 10 minutes. Engines begin rumbling deep inside the hulls of the ships. Lines are cast off. Slowly, the convoy moves toward the dark mouth of the channel leading into the open Pacific. Captain Tanaka watches the shoreline fade into darkness behind them. He knows the numbers. Every merchant captain knows the numbers. At the start of the war, Japan possessed roughly 6 million tons of merchant shipping. It sounded enormous in official reports, but that number included every kind of vessel. Tankers, cargo ships, passenger liners, coastal transports. The empire depends on those ships to move everything. Oil from Borneo, rice from Southeast Asia, coal from China, troops to distant island garrisons. But in the 2 years since Pearl Harbor, losses have begun to mount. American submarines have grown more aggressive. Their torpedoes are finally working reliably. Convoys that once sailed without fear now travel under constant threat. Ships vanish, sometimes with no warning. No survivors, no distress signals. Just empty ocean where a vessel once sailed. Inside the Naval Ministry in Tokyo, reports arrive weekly describing the losses. September shipping losses. October shipping losses. Each report shows the same pattern. More ships sunk, more cargo lost. But another report arrives as well. This one comes from Japanese intelligence officers studying American production. The numbers appear unbelievable. New merchant ships leaving American shipyards at astonishing speed. Liberty ships, hundreds of them, each capable of carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. Vice Admiral Matame Ugaki, Chief of Staff to Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, earlier in the war, and now a senior planner studies the report carefully. The production chart stretches across several pages. Month by month, the number of completed ships increases. 100 ships, 200, 300. The scale is staggering. Ugaki turns to another officer. These cannot all be warships, he says. The officer shakes his head. Most are cargo vessels. Simple cargo ships built quickly using prefabricated sections, welded hulls, standardized designs, minimal decoration. They are not beautiful ships, but they are effective. Each one replaces a lost vessel. Each one carries supplies across the ocean. Each one keeps American armies and fleets moving forward. Ugaki stares at the chart again. Even if Japanese submarines and aircraft sink several ships each month, the Americans are launching more than they lose. The balance is becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in California, the Kaiser shipyards are celebrating another launch. September the 27th, 1943. 11:40 a.m. Richmond Shipyard, number 3. Workers crowd along the slipway as the newest Liberty ship prepares to enter the water. Her name is SS Robert E. Peary. The steel hull gleams under bright sunlight. A bottle of champagne shatters against the bow. Sirens blow. The massive hull begins sliding down the greased rails into San Francisco Bay. Workers cheer. But this launch represents something extraordinary. The ship has been assembled in just over 4 days. 4 days from keel, laying to launch. The record shocks even experienced shipbuilders. The achievement is not entirely typical. Most Liberty ships still require several weeks to construct. But the demonstration proves something important. The system works. Shipbuilding has become an industrial process. Hull sections arrive from fabrication yards. Cranes place them into position. Teams of welders seal the seams. Engines and equipment slide into place almost automatically. Thousands of workers move through the shipyard like parts of a giant machine. Men and women, experienced welders, new trainees, farm workers, office clerks, even teenagers learning trades for the first time. The war effort has transformed civilian industry into a shipbuilding empire. And the ships keep coming. Back in Tokyo, the numbers continue arriving. More American cargo ships, more tankers, more transports. Japanese planners begin to realize something uncomfortable. Even if the Imperial Japanese Navy wins battles at sea, those victories may no longer decide the war. Because every time an American ship sinks, another appears. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3. But when a Japanese ship sinks, it is usually gone forever. The imbalance grows quietly, month by month, convoy by convoy, loss by loss. Yet inside the Japanese high command, few officers want to say the words aloud. Admitting the truth would mean admitting the original strategy is failing. The plan depended on exhausting American will before its industry could dominate the war. But the American industrial machine is already running at full speed, and the ocean is filling with ships. Ships built not by admirals or naval engineers, but by civilians, shipyard welders, factory workers, railroad crews delivering steel, men and women who have never seen combat. Yet their work is reshaping the war faster than any naval battle. Still in 1943, many Japanese officers cling to the hope that decisive victories at sea can still change the outcome. But deep within the reports arriving at naval headquarters lies the quiet turning point. A realization that very few men are ready to face. The enemy is building ships faster than Japan can destroy them. November 23rd, 1943, 4:45 a.m. Philippine Sea, east of Luzon. The cargo ship Tatsumaru moves slowly through black water under a sky filled with clouds. The ship's engines throb steadily as it pushes forward at 9 knots, its hull heavy with cargo bound for Japanese forces farther south. Inside the bridge, Captain Kenji Sato studies the compass and glances occasionally at the dim radar set recently installed by naval technicians. The radar equipment is unfamiliar to most merchant crews, and the small screen shows little more than scattered green pulses that fade in and out. Outside the bridge windows, the convoy stretches across the dark sea. 6 cargo ships, 2 tankers, 4 escort destroyers. Their destination lies far beyond the horizon in the islands of the Dutch East Indies. Fuel, rubber, copper, cargo essential to the Japanese war effort. Captain Sato wipes condensation from the window glass and looks toward the escorts. The destroyer Yijin Shigure leads the formation ahead of the convoy, her sharp bow cutting through low waves. Shigure has a reputation. Her captain, Commander Tamichi Hara, is one of the most experienced destroyer officers in the Imperial Japanese Navy. The ship has survived numerous battles in the Solomon Islands and is now assigned to protect the growing number of merchant convoys. Even with escorts, however, the tension aboard the ships never disappears. Submarines. That single word hangs over every convoy now sailing across the Pacific. American submarines have begun appearing everywhere. They attack shipping routes near the Philippines. They wait near the entrances to Japanese harbors. They patrol the narrow channels through which tankers and cargo ships must pass. And every successful attack reduces Japan's already shrinking merchant fleet. At 4:52 a.m., the lookout on Tatsumaru suddenly shouts, "Wake in the water." Captain Sato spins toward the starboard window. For a brief moment, he sees nothing. Then a faint white line appears across the dark surface. A torpedo wake slicing directly toward the convoy. Hard to port. The helmsman spins the wheel. The cargo ship begins turning slowly, too slowly. Merchant vessels cannot maneuver like destroyers. The torpedo strikes the tanker Teiyu Maru amidships. The explosion rips open the hull. A massive column of fire rises into the sky as burning oil spreads across the sea. The tanker begins sinking almost immediately. Crewmen leap into the water as flames race across the deck. Searchlights from the escort destroyers sweep across the waves. Sirens scream. Commander Hara, aboard Shigura, orders full speed toward the attack. Sonar contact. A crewman leans over the sonar equipment listening for the faint echo of a submarine. Possible contact, bearing 2. 10. Shigure accelerates. Depth charges roll off the stern. Explosions shake the water behind the destroyer, but the submarine is already gone. Somewhere beneath the waves, the United States Navy submarine USS Seahorse, commanded by Commander Donald McGregor, slips silently away. One torpedo attack, one tanker destroyed. But the damage goes far beyond the single ship. Every tanker lost means less fuel reaching Japan. Less fuel for aircraft. Less fuel for warships. Less fuel for factories already struggling with shortages. Back aboard Tatsumaru, Captain Sato watches the burning wreck of the tanker disappear into darkness behind them. The convoy continues forward. But the mood aboard every ship has changed. Everyone understands what this means. Another ship gone. Another link in the fragile supply chain destroyed. Inside naval headquarters in Tokyo, the situation grows increasingly alarming. Shipping reports now arrive almost daily, describing submarine attacks across the empire's sea. Vice Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue, responsible for naval logistics, studies the figures carefully. The pattern is undeniable. American submarines are sinking Japanese shipping faster than expected. Much faster. Each month, the losses increase. Tankers, cargo ships, troop transports. The submarine campaign is beginning to strangle Japan's supply routes. But the problem does not end with the submarines. American production continues rising. Shipyards across the United States launch new cargo ships in staggering numbers. Liberty ships, Victory ships, tankers, troop transports. Every few days, another vessel slides into the water. Vice Admiral Inoue turns to an aide. How many new merchant ships did the Americans launch last month? The aide checks a report. More than 200 vessels. Inoue says nothing for several seconds. 200 in a single month. Japan cannot build ships anywhere near that pace. Japanese shipyards remain limited by steel shortages, skilled labor shortages, and bombing raids that are beginning to strike industrial centers. Every lost ship is a permanent wound. Meanwhile, the Americans replace their losses almost instantly. The numbers are becoming terrifying. In 1943, American shipyards produced millions of tons of merchant shipping, more ships than many nations possessed before the war even began. Each one expands the logistical network supporting Allied armies and fleets. Fuel moves faster, ammunition arrives sooner, reinforcements cross oceans without interruption. For the Japanese Navy, the realization begins to spread quietly among officers. Naval battles are no longer the central problem. Logistics is. Because fleets cannot fight without fuel, armies cannot fight without ammunition, aircraft cannot fly without replacement parts, and all of it must travel by sea. Yet Japan is steadily losing control of the sea lanes that sustain its empire. Still, the official strategy remains unchanged. Convoys will be strengthened, more escorts will be assigned, anti-submarine tactics will improve, at least that is the hope. But far beyond Japanese planning rooms, American shipyards continue operating around the clock. Arc welders flash through the night. Cranes swing massive steel sections into place. Another cargo ship takes shape, then another, then another. Each vessel built by civilians who may never see the ocean where their ships will sail. Yet those ships are quietly determining the outcome of the war. June 19th, 1944. 6:05 a.m. Philippine Sea west of the Mariana Islands. The ocean is calm. A wide expanse of blue stretching beneath a bright tropical sky. On the flight deck of the aircraft carrier J.N. Taiho, the first aircraft engines of the morning roar to life. Rows of Mitsubishi A-6M50 fighters, Yokosuka D-4Y, Suisei dive bombers, and Nakajima B-6N, Tenzan torpedo bombers sit lined up along the deck. Crewmen in oil-stained uniforms rush between them, checking fuel lines, arming bombs, adjusting control surfaces. Inside the island superstructure, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of the Japanese mobile fleet, stands over a large navigation chart. American forces have landed in the Mariana Islands. If the United States captures these islands, their new B-29 Superfortress bombers will be able to strike the Japanese home islands directly. Ozawa's fleet must stop them. Around Taiho steam several of Japan's remaining aircraft carriers. Shokaku, Zuikaku, Junyo, Hyo, a powerful force on paper. 9 carriers, hundreds of aircraft. Yet Ozawa knows something troubling about this fleet. Many of the pilots preparing for takeoff this morning are inexperienced. The early years of the war consumed Japan's elite aviators. Losses at Midway Guadalcanal and across the Solomon Islands have steadily drained the Navy's best pilots. Training programs have been shortened. New pilots reach the fleet with only a fraction of the experience their predecessors possessed. Still, Ozawa believes a decisive battle may restore the situation. Destroy the American carrier force their invasion fleet to retreat. Stabilize the Pacific front. The signal officer steps forward. American carriers detected to the east. Ozawa nods slowly. The battle is about to begin. On the flight deck, the first aircraft roar down the carrier runway and lift into the morning sky. Wave after wave of Japanese aircraft climbs eastward toward the American fleet. From the bridge, Ozawa watches them disappear into the distance. But while the Japanese fleet prepares for battle, a completely different force is already shaping the outcome. Hundreds of miles away, the American carrier fleet steams forward under the command of Admiral Raymond Spruance. 17 aircraft carriers accompany the invasion force. 17. More than double the number Ozawa commands. Their flight decks stretch across the horizon like a floating airfield. Aircraft launch continuously. Fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers. The scale of the fleet is staggering. But even more astonishing is how quickly the United States assembled it. Just 2 years earlier, in 1942, American naval strength in the Pacific had been dangerously limited. Now entire fleets have appeared. New carriers, new destroyers, new cruisers, and behind them an ocean filled with supply ships, oil tankers, ammunition ships, cargo transports, mobile repair vessels, floating dry docks. Every ship required to keep a massive fleet operating thousands of miles from the American mainland. All of it built in civilian shipyards. Back aboard Taiho, the first reports begin arriving. Japanese aircraft have encountered heavy resistance. American Grumman, F-6F, Hellcat fighters swarm the incoming formations. Radar aboard American ships detects the attack waves long before they arrive. Interceptors climb to meet them. The battle becomes chaos in the sky. Japanese aircraft are shot down in large numbers before reaching the fleet. Only a few bombers break through. Their attacks achieve little. Then the American counter-strike begins. Radar operators aboard Japanese ships detect the approaching aircraft too late. Hundreds of American carrier planes sweep in from the east. Dive bombers scream downward through the sky. Torpedo bombers skim across the waves. Fighters strafe flight decks and gun positions. Explosions ripple across the Japanese fleet. The carrier Shokaku is struck by multiple bombs and torpedoes. Fires spread through the hangar deck. Within hours, she sinks beneath the waves. The carrier Hyo suffers a devastating torpedo hit that ignites aviation fuel vapors inside the hull. A massive explosion tears the ship apart. Aircraft returning from Japanese strike missions circle helplessly in the sky with nowhere to land. Many run out of fuel and crash into the sea. Throughout the day, American pilots shoot down wave after wave of Japanese aircraft. Later, the battle will earn a grim nickname among American aviators: the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By nightfall, Japan has lost hundreds of aircraft. Most of its carrier air groups have been destroyed. Ozawa stands silently on the bridge of Taiho as reports arrive. Aircraft losses, carrier losses, pilot losses. Then another disaster strikes. An American submarine, USS Albacore, fires a spread of torpedoes at Taiho earlier in the day. One torpedo struck the carrier's hull. At first, the damage seemed manageable. But gasoline vapors spread through the ship's ventilation system. Hours later, the vapors ignite. A catastrophic explosion rips through the carrier. The flagship of the Mobile fleet sinks beneath the sea. Vice Admiral Ozawa barely escapes aboard a destroyer. By the end of the battle, 3 Japanese carriers are lost. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed. Most of the remaining trained pilots killed. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier aviation is effectively finished. But even beyond the immediate disaster lies a deeper collapse. The original Japanese strategy depended on decisive naval battles, fleets clashing for control of the Pacific. Yet the Americans now possess something Japan cannot match: an industrial ocean. Every fleet action is backed by endless supply ships. New carriers appear year after year. Damaged ships are repaired quickly. Lost ships are replaced. Meanwhile, Japan struggles to fuel the ships it still possesses. Tankers disappear under submarine attacks. Cargo ships sink faster than they can be built. Without fuel, fleets cannot sail. Without ships, supplies cannot move. Without supplies, distant garrisons slowly starve. The decisive battle doctrine that once guided Japanese naval planning is collapsing. And it is collapsing not only because of enemy fleets, but because across the Pacific Ocean, civilian shipyards have created something the Imperial Japanese Navy never fully anticipated. A navy supported by an industrial system too vast to defeat. January 11th, 1945. 2:15 a.m. South China Sea west of Luzon. The sea is black and restless under a sky filled with heavy clouds. Rain falls in thin sheets across the dark water as the cargo ship Aikoku Maru struggles forward through the waves. Her engines vibrate through the steel hull, pushing the ship north toward the Japanese home islands. Inside the bridge, Captain Tadashi Morimoto leans over the navigation chart, his hands steady but his face drawn with exhaustion. The voyage has already lasted 9 days. Every hour has carried the same quiet fear. Submarines. The cargo hold beneath his feet is filled with crude oil stored in steel drums. Oil gathered from the last remaining refineries still operating in Southeast Asia. Fuel that Japan desperately needs. Without it, aircraft cannot fly. Factories cannot operate. Warships cannot leave port. The convoy surrounding Aikoku Maru is small. 3 cargo ships, 1 tanker, 2 escort destroyers. Once convoys might have included dozens of vessels. Now the numbers are smaller. Losses over the past 2 years have steadily reduced Japan's merchant fleet. Each ship now feels irreplaceable. Captain Morimoto glances out through the rain toward the escort destroyer EJN Harukaze, which moves ahead of the convoy with its bow cutting sharply through the waves. The destroyer's sonar operators listen constantly for submarines, hydrophones pressed to their ears, searching the dark water for the faint echo of propellers. Every convoy travels under the same tension. The ocean itself feels hostile. Yet the ships continue moving because they must. Inside the Japanese home islands, the situation is becoming desperate. Factories operate only part-time due to fuel shortages. Airfields lack aviation gasoline. Even naval bases restrict training exercises because fuel reserves are running dangerously low. Every cargo ship carrying oil or raw materials is now a lifeline. But far beneath the surface of the South China Sea, another vessel moves silently through the darkness. The United States Navy submarine, USS Bob, commanded by Commander Eugene Fluckey, glides forward at periscope depth. Fluckey peers through the periscope. Rain distorts the view, but the convoy is visible. 4 cargo vessels, 2 escorts. He studies their course carefully. Japanese convoys are easier to find now. The shipping lanes have become predictable. So few ships remain that they must use the same routes again and again. Fluckey lowers the periscope and turns to his crew. Prepare torpedo tubes 1 through 4. Inside the submarine, the crew moves quickly but calmly. Compressed air systems are checked. Gyroscopes inside the torpedoes spin up to speed. Course and speed calculations are written on a grease board. The submarine closes the distance slowly. At 2:42 a.m., the periscope rises again. Fluckey aligns the crosshairs on the lead tanker. Fire 1. A soft thud echoes through the submarine as the first torpedo leaves the tube. Seconds later, 3 more follow. The torpedoes race through the dark water toward the convoy. On the bridge of Aikoku Maru, the lookout suddenly shouts, "Torpedoes!" Captain Morimoto rushes to the window. White wakes streak across the water. The escort destroyer turns sharply. But it is too late. 1 torpedo slams into the tanker's engine room. The explosion tears the ship open. A second torpedo strikes one of the cargo ships amidships. Within minutes, 2 vessels are burning fiercely. Flames climb high into the rainy sky. The destroyers drop depth charges into the sea behind them. Explosions shake the water. But USS Bob is already turning away, slipping back into darkness. Another attack, another convoy shattered, another shipment of fuel lost. Back in Tokyo, the news arrives through coded radio reports. 2 cargo ships destroyed, 1 tanker sunk, few survivors. Inside the Navy Ministry, the reaction is grim silence. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, responsible for coordinating naval operations late in the war, studies the shipping charts carefully. The situation has become almost impossible. Japan began the war with roughly 6 million tons of merchant shipping. By early 1945, more than half of that fleet is gone. American submarines have sunk hundreds of ships. American aircraft now strike shipping even near the Japanese home islands. Convoys grow smaller because there are fewer ships left to protect. Every remaining vessel must sail longer routes to avoid known submarine patrol zones. Fuel shortages become catastrophic. Warships remain tied to harbor docks because there is no oil to operate them. Factories slow. Transportation networks collapse. Even the Japanese army begins experiencing supply shortages across China and Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, across the Pacific Ocean, the American industrial system continues operating at full capacity. Shipyards along both coasts launch vessels almost every day. New cargo ships, new tankers, new troop transports, and now, enormous fleets of specialized support vessels accompany the Navy. Floating repair docks capable of fixing damaged warships in forward areas. Mobile supply ships carrying spare aircraft engines and ammunition. Hospital ships. Fuel tankers that allow entire fleets to refuel while still at sea. The scale of this logistical network becomes overwhelming. Even when American ships are damaged in battle, repair ships often return them to service within weeks. When ships are sunk, replacements already wait in harbor. The flow of new vessels never stops. Back aboard Ikoku Maru, the surviving convoy struggles northward through the storm. 2 ships lost, cargo scattered across burning water. Captain Morimoto stands silently on the bridge as the escort destroyers search the sea for survivors. He understands something that many naval officers in Tokyo are only beginning to accept. Even if every remaining Japanese ship sails perfectly, even if every convoy reaches its destination, it will not be enough. The fleet is shrinking. The enemy's fleet is expanding. And the war at sea is no longer a contest of tactics or bravery. It has become a contest of production, a contest Japan is already losing. March 18, 1945. 10:30 a.m. Naval Ministry Building, Tokyo. A pale spring sun filters through the tall windows of the conference room overlooking Tokyo Bay. Outside, the harbor appears strangely quiet. Few ships move across the water. Where once dozens of cargo vessels arrived daily, bringing oil, food, and raw materials, now only scattered silhouettes drift slowly through the haze. Inside the room, senior officers of the Imperial Japanese Navy sit around a long wooden table covered with charts, intelligence reports, and shipping statistics. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito stands beside the wall map. Colored pins mark the sea lanes stretching across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. But the map no longer shows an empire expanding across the ocean. It shows something else. Loss. Red pins mark ships sunk by American submarines. Blue pins represent convoys destroyed by aircraft. Black pins indicate tankers lost to mines and air raids. The pins are so numerous that some regions of the map appear almost completely covered. Vice Admiral Ito gestures toward the map. Our merchant fleet has fallen below 3 million tons, he says quietly. The room remains silent. The number carries enormous weight. When the war began, Japan possessed roughly 6 million tons of merchant shipping. Already, that number had barely been enough to support the empire's vast network of supply routes. Now half of it is gone, and the losses continue every week. Another officer speaks carefully. Submarine activity has intensified near Formosa and the East China Sea. The American submarine campaign has grown far more effective. Improved radar allows submarines to locate convoys even at night. Better torpedoes now detonate reliably. Japanese escort forces remain limited and often lack effective sonar equipment. Convoys move slowly, predictably, and American submarines wait along the routes they must follow. Vice Admiral Ito turns another page in the report. Oil shipments from the Dutch East Indies have almost completely stopped. Tankers rarely survive the journey north. Without oil, naval operations collapse. Warships remain anchored in port. Training flights for new pilots are drastically reduced. Even coastal shipping around the Japanese home islands has become dangerous. American aircraft from carriers and newly captured bases now strike shipping lanes directly. The empire that once stretched across half the Pacific is beginning to choke. A junior officer enters the room carrying another report. He places it quietly on the table. Vice Admiral Ito reads the summary. Another convoy destroyed in the South China Sea. 3 cargo ships, 1 tanker, all sunk by American submarines. Few survivors. Ito places the paper down slowly. Then he turns toward the final page of the intelligence briefing. It describes something happening far beyond Japan's shrinking sea lanes. American ship production. The figures are almost beyond comprehension. In the past year alone, American shipyards have launched thousands of vessels. Liberty ships, Victory ships, fleet oilers, transport ships, landing craft, repair ships, hospital ships, cargo ships large and small. Entire floating supply networks capable of supporting massive fleets thousands of miles from American shores. Even if submarines sink dozens of American ships, the losses barely appear in the overall numbers. Because every month new ships replace them, sometimes more ships than were lost. The scale of the system becomes undeniable. American naval power is no longer limited by the number of ships that existed before the war. It grows continuously, every week, every month. Shipyards on the American West Coast operate around the clock. Arc welders flash through the night. Cranes lift enormous prefabricated hull sections into place. Thousands of workers assemble ships like components on a giant production line. The war has become an industrial phenomenon, and the United States has fully mobilized its civilian population to sustain it. Vice Admiral Ito studies the final chart. It compares merchant ship losses on both sides of the Pacific. Japanese shipping tonnage declines steadily year after year. American shipping tonnage rises dramatically. 2 lines crossing in opposite directions. The meaning is unmistakable. One navy is shrinking. The other is expanding beyond anything Japan can possibly match. Outside the Naval Ministry building, the distant rumble of aircraft echoes faintly across Tokyo. American B-29. Super Fortress bombers have begun striking the Japanese home islands with increasing frequency. Factories burn. Industrial districts collapse under waves of incendiary bombs. Shipyards themselves have become targets. Repair docks, fuel depots, steel mills. Every piece of infrastructure needed to rebuild the fleet is now under attack. Vice Admiral Ito finally speaks again. Our strategy assumed we could defeat the American fleet before their industry mobilized. The room remains silent. Everyone understands the next sentence before he says it. They have mobilized. No one argues. No one proposes a new strategy, because none exists. Japan can no longer replace its losses. The sea lanes are collapsing. Fuel supplies are nearly exhausted, and the enemy's production continues without interruption. The officers around the table realize something profound. The war at sea was never decided truly by battleships or carriers. It was decided in shipyards, in factories, in assembly lines where civilian workers produced ships faster than experienced training or doctrine could compensate. The realization arrives quietly, but it arrives too late. Because by the spring of 1945, the ocean surrounding Japan already belongs to the enemy. July 24th, 1945. 6:10 a.m., Kure, Naval Base, Hiroshima Prefecture, Japan. Morning mist hangs low over the harbor. The air is heavy with humidity, and the water inside the sheltered anchorage lies almost perfectly still. Once this harbor had been one of the most powerful naval bases in the world. Now it feels strangely silent. From the observation deck overlooking the bay, Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito watches the gray shapes resting in the water below. They are warships, some of the last major vessels of the Imperial Japanese Navy, but they no longer resemble a fleet. They look like relics. The massive battleship JNI lies anchored near the center of the harbor, once converted into a hybrid battleship carrier. Her flight deck is empty now. No aircraft remain to launch. Nearby, the cruiser JN Tone sits motionless, its hull scarred from earlier air attacks. Further toward the docks, the carrier EJN in Amagi rests heavily against the pier. Her flight deck twisted and burned from recent bombing raids. Most of these ships cannot sail, not because of battle damage. Because of fuel, Japan's oil reserves have nearly vanished. The tankers that once carried crude oil north from Borneo and Sumatra have been destroyed across the Pacific. American submarines intercepted them along the sea lanes. American aircraft hunted them near the coast. American mines now block many of the narrow passages leading into the inland sea. The supply network that once fed the Japanese Empire has collapsed. Vice Admiral Ito lowers his binoculars and studies the empty water where merchant ships once crowded the harbor. In the early years of the war, dozens of cargo ships would arrive here every week. Tankers unloading oil, freighters carrying food, transport ships moving soldiers between distant islands. Now the docks remain mostly quiet. Only a few surviving vessels creep cautiously along the coast under escort. Many never arrive. Across the Pacific Ocean, however, the sea tells a very different story. Entire armadas now move across the water toward the Japanese home islands. Aircraft carriers stretching across the horizon. Battleships and cruisers forming protective rings. Hundreds of destroyers screening the fleet. And behind them an enormous logistical armada. Oil tankers refueling warships at sea. Ammunition ships replenishing magazines, supply transports delivering aircraft vehicles and construction equipment, floating repair ships capable of fixing damaged vessels within days, hospital ships waiting for wounded sailors. Every component of this fleet depends on cargo ships built in American civilian shipyards. Liberty ships, Victory ships, tankers, transports. Thousands of them. Ships constructed by welders, factory workers, and engineers who never expected to influence the outcome of naval war. Yet their work created something unprecedented. A navy sustained not only by its warships but by an industrial ocean of support vessels. In Tokyo, the consequences of this imbalance become impossible to ignore. Food shortages spread across the population. Coal shipments from occupied territories vanish. Industrial output collapses as raw materials fail to arrive. Even basic transportation inside the home islands begins breaking down. The Japanese army units still scattered across Southeast Asia and the Pacific slowly become isolated. Many garrisons receive no supplies for months. Starvation begins claiming more lives than combat. Ships that might once have rescued or resupplied them simply no longer exist. The empire that once stretched across the Pacific depended entirely on sea transportation. When that transportation disappeared, the empire began to collapse. Vice Admiral Ito turns away from the harbor and walks slowly along the observation platform. He remembers the planning meetings years earlier, maps covered with fleet movements, discussions of decisive naval battles, calculations of how many American ships could be destroyed before the United States lost the will to continue the war. Almost every calculation focused on fleets, battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, but very few officers had studied the quiet transformation happening inside American industry. Civilian shipyards expanding across both coasts, factories reorganized to build engines, turbines, and steel hull plates, assembly lines capable of producing ships at a speed that traditional naval shipbuilding had never imagined. While Japanese strategy focused on destroying fleets, American civilians were building the ships that made those fleets possible. Even when American warships were sunk and battle replacements arrived. Even when cargo ships disappeared beneath submarine attacks, more appeared. The production never stopped. Vice Admiral Ito looks once more across the silent harbor. A handful of ships remain, proud vessels that once sailed across an empire. Now they wait motionless beside empty docks. In the distance, the faint sound of aircraft engines begins to grow. American carrier planes approaching once again. Another air raid against the naval base. Sirens begin wailing across the harbor. Sailors scramble toward anti-aircraft guns. But everyone understands the truth. The battle for control of the sea was already decided long before this morning. It was decided in shipyards, in factories, in assembly lines where civilians built ships faster than experienced doctrine or naval tradition could overcome. The Imperial Japanese Navy once believed skill and decisive battle would determine victory. Instead, an ocean filled with civilian-built ships reshaped the balance of power. And by the time that realization arrived, the outcome of the war could no longer be changed.